So this is what we're going to do this evening. We're doing some housekeeping and an introduction, obviously. Then we'll jump into a facilitated Q&A. I've curated some questions along with the rest of the team based on, what we learned last week and what I think most of you will probably want to know from our awesome panelists. And then after that, I'm sure many of you will have more questions. So we'll jump into an audience Q&A. So you'll have the opportunity to ask questions then. Following that, we'll have a little bit of food and some drinks and a chance for you guys to network with each other and to ask the panelists any very pressing personal questions.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
This is therapy, isn't it?
Yeah. It's nothing about net zero then. Yeah.
Invention. Yeah.
And then for anyone who's interested in the space that we're in, being in ResTech, there is an optional tour afterwards if you would like to join that as well, which I would highly encourage you to do.
Sorry, I'm like,
That's okay.
break dance.
I like that you're
I'll do
going
it
to.
now.
So just some quick housekeeping. The emergency exits are, if you exit this door, there's one on the left and the right, so you can pick whichever one you would like. The bathrooms are to the left and then right again down that little maze of a corridor, so feel free to head there if you need to. ResTech. We are super excited to be hosting this event in the ResTech building. If this is new to you, ResTech is a partnership between the University of Newcastle and Ampcontrol, and they basically have an aim of They have an aim of helping people develop and commercialize their research, specifically in the areas of resourcing, energy, and something else.
Something else? Is it? Resource energy.
Oh, I've never thought of that.
Oh, that's so true. Okay. They have science. Yeah, let's go with that. And so they have some really awesome facilities here. I don't know if anyone saw them as you were walking through, but they have had one of their members kindly offer to stay back way past their time to clock off to stay and give you guys a tour afterwards. So if anyone is interested, it's really great. And they have some really interesting things here. Oh, sorry, one too far. For anyone who's new to I2N, I think there is a few of you here. I2N is an initiative of the University of Newcastle. It stands for Integrated Innovation Network. And basically we work with students, staff, alumni and community members on building their enterprise skills, validating their ideas and building successful and scalable companies. So if there's anyone here who has an idea or they're working on something interesting, please come and visit us over at the Q building at any time. We'd love to hear what you have going on. And last but certainly not least, we have a wonderful sponsor of this event, Spark Festival, and the co-CEO, David, is here with us today. So thank you. So really appreciate the support from Spark Festival, and this afternoon, later on, when you guys are having some wonderful food and drinks, please go find David and thank him for that. And make sure you get to know him, because he's a really awesome guy. So thank you so much for your support.
Personal questions.
If you like, yes. Great. So we're here for the expert panel session. What is a grand challenge? There's some of you who were here last week, so thank you so much for coming back again. And there's some of you who are new. So a grand challenge is an annual initiative of the University of Newcastle. And basically the aim of it is we want people to form interdisciplinary teams and create solutions for complex problems. This particular year, we're focusing specifically on net zero and more specifically on scope 3 carbon emissions. And so last week we had our expert panel where we had some people from the university, other people from industry, talking specifically about the problem of measuring, recording and reducing those scope 3 emissions. It was a really interesting panel with some very transparent insights. And so if you weren't here, that recording is made available on the Net Zero Grand Challenge website. So feel free to check that out after this. And this recording of today's event will also be there. So feel free to watch them back to back if you would like some homework. More than welcome. This is the challenge statement for this year's Grand Challenge. I'll just have it up there, but it's basically just about how can we assist organisations to better reduce and record their scope 3 carbon emissions. If you're still not sure what scope 3 means or what the carbon emissions means or even net zero, that's okay. I've been in this space for about a month now and I still have so many questions. And so that's why I invited some experts along to come and help us along that journey. And so we have Cameron Mitchell from Carbon Neutral, we have Charlotte Connell from Greenhouse and Lockie Burke from NetNada. Can we all give them a round of applause? So good to see you twice. Yeah. Amazing. So our very first question would be, could each of you just briefly describe who you are and your relationship to net zero and scope 3 carbon emissions, or really why you care about them?
Sure. Shall I go first?
Oh, you
Just
sure?
the order.
While you're there. I know, you kind of look straight at me.
West Charlotte.
My name's Cameron. I work for Carbon Neutral. It's actually based in Perth, but I do work from Newcastle and fly over to see the head office every few months. But the main point of the company is to reduce and measure carbon offsets. So we run a couple of services in terms of carbon footprint, emissions reduction strategies, and we actually offer carbon credits themselves. So that's how we assist in all your scope emissions, actually 1 to 3. So
Yeah, thanks, man.
Wonderful. Hi, I'm Charlotte, and a few familiar faces because I'm a Nova Castrum, born and bred, but I live on the Sunshine Coast now. Don't hold it against me. But my background is, I guess, in community building across the climate tech ecosystem in Australia. So I do that in Sydney and also now in Melbourne. Maybe in Newcastle soon too, or even my hometown. But definitely not I feel a bit silly because I'm not the expert in scope 1, 2, or 3, but I can give you a nice ecosystem approach of like where the demand's coming from and also like who's doing it really well.
Great. Thanks, Charlotte. Lucky.
And my name's Lockie Burke. I'm the co-founder and CEO of NetNada, and NetNada is a software that specialises in focusing on the scope 3 emissions. And so we've analysed about 255,000 businesses now, and so have a very, very good understanding of how supply chains work and also how the impacts are generated within supply chains. Of course, also what those companies are creating from a scope 1, scope 2, and their own scope 3 perspective as well.
Cool. Amazing. Thank you so much. As you can see, it's a really great panel to have up here because they have many things that link them together, but also some very big differences in their insights. And so I hope by the end of today, you'll have a really good understanding of the entirety of what could be innovative in this scope 3 space. So Cameron, as a leader in the carbon solutions and offset development space, can you provide an overview of the key services and offerings that Carbon Neutral provides to businesses to help them reduce their scope 3?
yeah, sure. So similar to what I just mentioned before, but yeah, we offer a carbon consultancy service. So we have a team of consultants that kind of all work together, and we can come to a business and basically go through their whole value chain. Once we've done that, we come up with like an emission strategy plan, and then we can break all that down into trying to get companies to try and reduce. I know we're focusing on scope 3, but the scope 1, 2, and 3. And then we move into the carbon offset and credit, so people can actually come to us. We run actually quite big projects where we, for example, we run a big reforestation project in Perth where we restore like the native habitat, and over time we generate credits off that. So people can actually buy those credits and offset their emissions as well. So.
Yeah, awesome. And I just wanted to make a point that I know that we are focusing on scope 3 emissions, but I totally understand that a company like yours obviously has to focus on scope 1 and 2. And so if there's anything that you think is relevant for people throughout this evening, feel free to mention scope 1 and 2 as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Really great. Lockie, can you walk us through the core functionality of NetNada and how it helps businesses, but also how did the idea come about? Was it something that you felt very passionate about originally, or did that develop a little bit later?
Yeah, for sure. Look, originally myself and my business partner came together because we saw a massive problem with the fact that sustainability action itself was extremely hard to access for small and medium enterprises. Yes, big companies can easily go to EY or KPMG and get their analysis done and part ways with $100,000 or more. But the reality is most businesses can't do that. They don't have that sort of cash, and they don't have the internal resources or subject matter expertise. So we initially, our backgrounds both in AI development and data sets. We created an AI that would automate the scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 analysis for businesses, so that we could make it extremely democratized, scalable, and really take all the need for the man in the loop out of it for small businesses. Then as a result from that, and once we had a couple of hundred small businesses using software, we did something that I guess entrepreneurs don't often get to do, and said, pat on the back to each other, we've done something here that's getting used. But we've identified that maybe we've stumbled across a bigger problem. And the bigger problem was very large organizations have very complex supply chains, but they have no way of engaging with their small suppliers because they can't ask their 10-person catering company to go to EY and way to the $100,000, right? And so we very quickly sort of turned our SME focused product into something that could be deployed through supply chains and then could be used by those bigger companies to help their suppliers to report back to them. And so that's how we've managed to hit that sort of scalability with a few 100,000 businesses getting the analysis. So for us, from a data perspective, we follow a data pyramid as a hierarchy data enrichment process. We want to move everyone away from what's called input-output analysis, which I'm sure we'll talk about today. But input-output analysis is based off large data sets where you take dollar spend figures and then you make an assumption on what the correlating emissions factor is based off the primary and secondary category that supplier's in. Our whole idea is let's move everyone away from that and let's try and enable more and more granular data. So where you might get to the point of where Cameron might even be able to help with this sort of stuff, where you might have life cycle assessment analysis, which is a very specific, scientific, accurate analysis of exactly that product, right? And so I guess that's how our system works from an architecture perspective.
And how much generative AI is involved?
Um,
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
That's fine.
yeah, a bit. So it's important to sort of segment what is AI and what's not. So our AI is called Nettie. Nettie's also my mum's name, so it's kind of like funny when you ask it stuff, and their mum definitely doesn't know. But first thing we built was a vectorized database. So the vector database essentially indexes all of this information, and it has what's called a global memory. So if it sees McDonald's in your supply chain, we won't tell anyone. And if it sees McDonald's also in my supply chain, say when we both leave here, we use the corporate cards when we get McDonald's, it'll go, oh, I've seen McDonald's before. It was in Charlotte's company supply chain. And it will then interact with that piece of information and the indexes on that supplier from their sustainability reports, from public disclosure statements, from all the information it's gathered. So it basically means every time an analysis is occurring, it's getting smarter and better, which is, of course, generative. The second piece is using all of this information to create an LLM of sorts. And so you can go into our system and you can say, hey, Nettie, I'm thinking of doing a post-grad study next year, and I want to pick the university in New South Wales that has the best waste and recycling, or the highest rate of diversion from landfill, and it can tell you. That's kind of how we use generative AI.
Oh, cool. No, I was just interested. Sorry.
I think it's really great that you asked that, because last week we had a couple of questions specifically around AI, and I know later on in this Q&A we'll ask a little bit about that too. So it's really
I
important.
managed up to head, but it's just, understanding scope 3, we're going to have to use those tools.
100%. I mean, it's just not possible to do without, right? Like, even if you have a small business, you probably have a few hundred suppliers. Once you got even a like semi-medium to large business, you got thousands, right? And big businesses have hundreds of thousands of global suppliers. It's not possible for anybody, let alone consultants who charge you by the hour, to go through all those suppliers.
Oh, that's really great information. Thank you. Now, Charlotte, as the climate tech ambassador for Greenhouse, what are some of the most promising climate tech companies that you've seen being here is one here.
Here are some I prepared earlier.
The solutions that you've encountered that are helping to reduce scope 3 emissions, and why do you think that they are so promising?
Yeah, look, we were talking about this before. It can be a crowded space, and that's a really good thing. And the companies that differentiate slightly are the ones that are doing really well. Like, I think of a good example of Giveable, who was a recent recipient. And if you haven't heard about the Go Green Co-Innovation Program, GGCIP, do find out about it. It's a grant program. There's a $20 million pool of funding available for Australian companies in the climate space to partner with Singaporean companies for either early stage R&D, commercialization, or expansion. So Giveable was a recipient of the last cohort of that, and so was Footprint Lab, which also does the Scope 3 analysis and data machine. But Giveable was a good one because I think about, the value add and the co-benefits you can have of understanding your emissions profile across Scope 1, 2, and 3, because they were spurred on by the Modern Slavery Act. And I used to work in infrastructure. You would know about this, Michael, in a bit of infrastructure, but when there's policy shifts, and there was one where any company that generates over $100 million in revenue needs to at least understand the risks in their supply chain of modern slavery. And it was like, oh gosh, now we have to understand. So companies like Giveable give that emissions, but also like the sustainability and social impact profile. So, and this is a thing coming, like the safeguard mechanisms coming, and there aren't enough Australian carbon credit units. ACCUs,
Yeah, ACCUs in
Yeah.
Australia. Yeah.
that's in Australia, there aren't enough to meet the demand that's coming. So we need to understand where the emissions are coming from, how to reduce them as much as possible. And then the offsets, it's like, there's just not enough.
Yeah.
So if you're in project origination, get into it. So there are a couple of companies, like there are others, like I used to personally offset my emissions profile with all the flying and my family's emissions with Trace. They offer, you can do individual, but they work with small to medium-sized businesses as well, and with all the staff training. Some days doing really well has attracted investment from Sophie Perdon's Planeteer Capital, and if you're not across Climate Tech VC, that's her newsletter. And she would see millions of companies in the climate space and has invested in this startup out of Tasmania, because they're looking at it from that accounting perspective as well. So, I think the more you can offer value in different areas, so like Lockheed's done that really well in customer development and finding that product market fit. So there is a lot of opportunity for growth in this area. We've set some really ambitious targets. Over 92% of GDP globally has committed to the Science Based Targets Initiative. So they've committed to some form of net zero commitments. So there's huge demand in this area. It is crowded, but there's room for more. Like all rising tides lift boats. We're going to have to get this. Like we've got Paris commitments. Australia has net zero commitments. They're coming. Like 2030 was really far away. Now all of a sudden it's not that far away.
No.
And we've got they were in Paris recently, but we've got the Brisbane Olympics coming up, and they want to make them the most sustainable. So that's a huge opportunity as well.
I was on a call today with a group that I'm a part of called the Carbon Accounting Alliance, and it's essentially like all of
Sounds like a fun alliance. Tell us how it is.
no, but it's essentially like all of our competitors, and we compete very fiercely, but we all are in this same group, and we meet every quarter, and we discuss sort of things we're seeing, how we can collaborate in ways that, at the end of the day, help fight climate change the best, while still totally understanding that it's a competitive space that we're in, which is cool, right? Because there aren't too many industries where you have that, and it's pretty amazing to see all the different CEOs and founders in the room. But today someone said there's enough climate change to go around for all of us. Someone said. I think that's a very good point. So it's competitive, but we need it to be competitive.
Yeah. But you all tackle it from different angles too. Like that's good that you can be in that room. Like Avani is like that larger enterprise, and you guys work in this area.
Yeah.
There's a lot of companies doing really well, but it's just, and it's really great that you can come together at a round table. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's cool. It's really cool.
Yeah, that's really great. And so what I'm hearing is that although there is so much space for people to be innovating in this space, it's really important that they have something that's slightly different or that's creating impact in another small niche as well, or a big niche, in order to make it super impactful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this kind of leads into one of the questions I know that you're going to ask, but for anyone in this room who's thinking of starting a startup or who has previously, you'll know that you make hypotheses, you make guesses, and they're usually wrong. And our first hypothesis was how do we build an AI that does what an EY sustainability consultancy team does, right? But that was wrong, really wrong, because what we've now learned is there are incredible people with amazing sustainability subject matter expertise, and there aren't enough of those people to tackle one of the biggest problems the world's ever seen. And so now what we've become is more, how do we enable them? How do we force multiply them? How do we make them be able to just focus on the things that create the most impact and take all of the crappy data analysis, counting up Excel sheets, PDFs out of it? So I think that's the point is you got to create systems that support people who have subject matter expertise, because you've got somebody who might be amazing at embodied emissions and can tell you everything about architecture and how to build, the most sustainable designs. And then you'll have somebody else who really understands waste and recycling, somebody else who's really, really good with, water or biodiversity or whatever it may be. So it's about, creating softwares and solutions that support them rather than complement them.
And actually, that's a really good point. Like just on like the Modern Slavery Act made you understand the social impacts of your supply chain. And then it's like these commitments we've made to net zero, understands those emissions. And then it's nature is like that sort of natural sophistication of the market that we understand. And there is going to be a lot more demand for understanding nature and your biodiversity risks, which seems silly in like urban environments or engineering companies, but there's a nature repair market and it's on its way. So we need to understand that better.
What I am really loving about this is that last week the panel was obviously a bunch of people in the industry who were looking to reduce their scope 3 emissions or their emissions in total, who were like, we know nothing about this space. And so we bring in the experts, and there's you guys who were like, we know a lot, but still there's so much to learn. And so I think a lot of the time when you talk to people who want to be innovating or want to be entrepreneurs, they're like, oh, but every market is so oversaturated. Where do you know where to start or where to go? And so even hearing you guys say that this isn't a saturated market, but there is so much room and that we have to lean on each other and innovate together is really, I think, inspiring, especially for all the people who are wanting to start on that journey. So thank you for stating that so early in the pattern. That's great.
Oh, we've mucked up the
No, I love it.
the
That's my
narrative.
questions.
But just on that, like, Michael, I'm going to call you out that, we're going to have some demand in the room here. It's like your commitment, yours personally, GHD's commitment.
I just walked here.
Yeah.
By the way. Yeah.
It's like I got lost and there was drinks. What's the commitment to net zero for a GHD? It's by 2025, right?
Yeah.
For scope.
Everything.
All scopes.
So,
Yeah.
Same for the University of Newcastle.
Yeah.
so how are you?
Put the spotlight on.
Yeah. How are you tackling that? And who are you talking to?
There's conveniently a mic right above.
Yeah.
We didn't put that there, I promise.
But it would be like, that's a big challenge. I mean, or is that a really easy, achievable target to have by 2025?
No, it's not. It's particularly scope 3. It's crazy. But you've got to set goals, and you've got to have big, hairy, audacious goals, right? So we've set the goal and we're heading that way, and we're going to do our damnedest to get there. I'm not at the level where I'm managing that overarching thing. I'm just looking after Northern New South Wales. And we're office based. We don't do civil engineering. We don't have bulldozers and things like that. We design mostly. So we've got a general, compared to those construction companies, we don't have a massive footprint, but it's still a tricky one when you're looking downstream. So yeah, tricky.
I mean, on that point, there's obviously a lot of people here today who weren't at the panel last week. And if you haven't watched that video, we had our Director of Strategy and our Sustainability Manager from the university here on that panel speaking specifically about the University of Newcastle, who has obviously made a goal that we would be net zero by 2025. And so there was some of the similar questions of how are we going with that? Is it something that we think that we'll achieve? And the information that they gave us is that, the University of Newcastle is doing really well at scope 1 and scope 2, that 97% of our emissions now are scope 3. And so that's obviously quite difficult. But what I really love about what they said, and I'll say it again in case anyone didn't hear it last week, is that the University of Newcastle is obviously a very big organisation, and this goes in with what you were saying earlier, Lockie. It's a very big organisation, and they know that at the end of 2025, they could pay a very large amount of money to offset their emissions, but they don't want to, right? And so that's what these kind of solutions are all about, is how do we make it cheaper than what it would cost to offset it in that way, or the same amount, but obviously have a much better impact for a large organisation like the university, but also all the small companies who don't have that kind of money to be offsetting in that way. And so I think that that's what's really interesting about having people like you up here and to have people wanting to innovate in this space, because there are massive organisations needing to do it immediately, and there's going to be organisations further on who have to do it eventually. So yeah, that's really great. Thank you, Mike, for answering that. I appreciate it. Cameron, jump to you. Hello. What are the key challenges that you see in providing these carbon solutions, and how has Carbon Neutral overcome them?
Yeah, cool. So definitely to do with scaling. I think scaling to meet demand, we actually need more land resources. It's becoming, especially generating these ACCUs, it's becoming really hard. So, and the other thing is a key challenge, and I even fell into this trap, was the misinformation about offsets. So I it's kind of funny. I think there was a time where even I thought that carbon credits were a license to pollute. These big corporate companies can just buy these offsets and be like, we can just continue and do what we want to do. But I think what kind of got me going was the fact that a lot of these credits as well, that what we deal with is they staple co-benefits, so which is huge. So an example would be we have an international development team that works with Save the Children, and we basically run a project in Nepal, and we give them we generate cook stoves, and so they use these cook stoves, and people are like, well, how does that relate to carbon? Well, it actually stops deforestation, so then we generate credits that way, but then it actually has an effect on all these other SDG goals, so it helps with their health, for example. So they're not actually lighting fires in a home and breathing all that smoke inhalation, or they're not using fuel to go out and actually chop these trees down. So that's probably one of the biggest things. Maybe it's a form of education as well, but it's really important to get across that, people can buy credits, but it's actually the other effects that it's having. It's connecting to these other big SDG goals that we need to meet. So,
And I think it's number 6 or something in Project Drawdowns, how to tackle climate change is educating girls. So if they're spending less time trying to gather wood and cooking meals, and they can stay in school for longer, it's an effective way to fight climate change.
And it's really interesting because these carbon these credit projects actually increase the life cycle of the project because it becomes self-sustaining. So the money that you make from the credits actually gets put back into the project, and then they keep going on. They can last up to 20 years. Whereas some of if these carbon projects weren't really happening, who's to say that would actually be occurring? Those meeting those SDG goals. So yeah, I find it's very important.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Charlotte, you've had the opportunity to work closely with climate tech innovators in markets like Singapore and the US. What are some of the pioneering Scope 3 emissions reduction solutions that you're noticing globally? And how can other companies, catch up in Australia or be innovating in this similar space?
Yeah, I know. I saw that question and I was like, I actually think Australia is world class in this area. We have a really sophisticated carbon credit market. And for that reason, we are really well poised to be global leaders here. And we have set, some will say they're not as aggressive as they should be, targets. So I think the Australian companies that are doing really well, but they're doing really well globally, like NetNata's, you have clients in the UK, you've got some in the US now. Some days attracted investment from overseas. Same with Trace, they're set up in the UK as well. These markets, trying to find out your Scope 3 emissions and reduce them. This is a global problem when we made that commitment to the Paris Agreement for reducing climate change warming to 1.5.
Yeah.
Let's hope we get less than that. 28 degrees the other day, hottest day on record. I know, I feel very positive about all the incredible solutions around. There are so many, and these commitments. The carrots as well as a stick, but the hard evidence of climate change is really hard to ignore. That's happening. So Australia is really world class in that area, but we need definitely more of the carrot and the stick. We have that sort of stick, and it's not much of a stick for the 2025 safeguard mechanism kicking in. The IRA, if no one knows it, the Inflation Reduction Act, not the Irish Republican Army, but the IRA has been a huge carrot for spurring on global innovation in this space. And Australia can uniquely play with America that has that. We can uniquely play with China that has very aggressive targets with renewables. Not so much in emissions reduction, but we have to reduce the emissions of our supply chains to be able to sell to Europe for the C-band. So the carbon adjustment abatement mechanism. I don't know, Mark, you're nodding. Do you know what it's called? So I think Australia is really well class in this area. And Australia really punches above its weight in terms of climate tech innovation. And we can see that not just because we do really well, but half of the investment raised from our climate tech innovators is from overseas. And maybe because the Australian dollar is bad, but also because they're world class.
Is there anything that you've seen internationally that we don't do a lot of here in the climate tech space?
Invest more in it, far out. I was thinking that too, in terms of Australia is behind Norway as the most capital efficient producers of unicorns.
Wow.
Yet we spend hardly anything on it. So if we invested more in our tech innovators, like imagine how many more Atlassians, Canvas that we could have.
Yeah.
But we don't, like in terms of other countries, like I'll find the graph and I can send it to you to send out to everyone. We just don't invest enough in that space. And we really should.
Yeah. Thank you.
But it's great that the university has $30,000 up for grabs.
Yes, it is. For anyone who didn't know that. The Net Zero Grand Challenge, 3 of the most promising solutions or proposals for solutions that come out of it will receive $10,000 in funding from the university to develop and deploy those ideas. So thank you for that plug. Really appreciate it. That was
Yeah.
Lockie, do you have anything to add to that? Like obviously Charlotte's mentioning that you have some clients that are international, and so from those relationships, have you noticed anything of why they're coming to an Australian-based company, or is there something that you see internationally that you wish we could do more of here?
I think, look, it's a global problem, exactly that, and if you have global data sets, you can service global clients. It's as simple as that. So we're lucky, we're in a very well-regarded country. We have a lot of these global companies have some form of a head office or a key office at least in Australia, and so for us, like the reason why we have team members in California and team members in the UK and a team member in Dubai is so that we can have multiple touch points to the same companies, right? Like we did no work at all with McDonald's, but I'll just use them as an example. Like they're everywhere, so we need to be everywhere, right? If we want to sell to them, right? And so I think for us it's about always having the best data sets, always making sure those data sets cover as much of global GDP as they possibly can. And then that gives us the best chance to be in the room with global companies.
Yeah. My next question was also for you anyway, but it was, can you just tell us one of the biggest challenges that you've had in building the NetData platform, and how did you overcome it? That's fine.
Big one.
Today. Look, matching algorithms are really, really tricky things. So we build a lot of automated matching algorithms to ingest data and then to run them against whatever outputs we want. When you take a global client of ours, like for example, Best Western Hotels, that has 4,950 hotels around the world, you're pulling a lot of data, like billions of lines of code and information just from cities, let alone the whole organization. And so for us, figuring out when there's any issues in algorithms is like literally finding a needle in a haystack. And so that's definitely been a challenge. And for us, overcoming it was coffee and really late nights, mostly. So there was quite a bit of that. And the other thing is as well, like we're always building integrations. And we're always building different environments. So like we have closed data environments for certain clients, which means we have to have our own IP whitelisting set up for them, which means we have to have the specific functionality for certain clients, which can be really challenging. And then the last thing I would say to my point before about enabling the subject matter expertise in people, we've now recently started to build no-code functionality. And like anyone who's built a website here, that's a no-code platform, right? Wix is a no-code platform. You don't have to code to create an email capture. Same thing here. And so, being able to build things that are flexible enough for somebody to come in with no coding experience themselves to then build a feature that represents their niche expertise is very hard. They're probably just off the top of my head a few of the challenges for us.
No, that's really great. And how did you overcome them? How long did that take to overcome that kind of challenge?
I think this is probably a good lesson for anyone in the room who's an entrepreneur. Like you just get really, really used to things not working, and that's all right. It really is water off a duck's back. It's all good. I think I got a couple of grey hairs here that have come a bit prematurely, but apart from that, you realize that it's not the end of the world. Like the best way to fix it is forward. So that's good. That's kind of the approach that our team takes.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much for sharing that. I think that that's really great advice because I think sometimes people either think that entrepreneurship is too hard or they think it's just like really easy, right? And so
Yeah.
to hear that, like, yeah, it's very challenging, but it's worth it. You just kind of push through is great.
I think like especially to people who are at university, naivety is like your greatest strength. Right? Like it's awesome.
Yeah.
You're sort of not afraid of failing, and I think Dave said this before when we were having a drink, like, and having a chat at the start. Like, what's your worst outcome? You fail, and you leave with a bunch of learnings. Like in my first company, we got investment off a guy who was one of the early investors in PayPal, and he said, and I was kind of like 21 at that stage, was kind of freaking out. We got quite a lot of money, and he was like, "What are you freaking out about?" And I was like, "Well, like we could lose a few $1 million here for you and all the rest." And he was like, "What's the worst thing that can happen?" He goes, "You lose the money, you leave with experience." He said, 2 years of working in a good startup is the equivalent of learning 15 years of knowledge in a normal job. That's what he said. And I went, okay, interesting. Walked away. Harvard Business School put out a paper saying it was 1 to 7. So 1 to 7 is 2 to 14. He said 2 to 15. He wasn't far off. So, like, I think, yeah, do it. You'll learn.
That's really great advice. Thank you. Really appreciate that.
And cheaper than Harvard Business School.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've heard,
Yeah.
yeah.
can be. Unless you lose the million.
Yeah.
It's not your millions.
Yeah,
Well,
that's true.
Yeah, exactly.
Venture capital.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cam, as one of the longest standing carbon offset providers in Australia, what emerging trends or innovative technologies do you see on the horizon that could further enhance or accelerate Scope 3 emissions?
It would be exactly what like something like Lockie's company for sure. Even like these companies are coming out with carbon accounting, where you can kind of implement these systems into your operation and you can kind of track things. Or you can break it all down and you can actually track things quite like live even, or even, I don't know a lot about that, but a blockchain, don't know if like you know much about that, but blockchain is coming out and being more of a thing, and especially AI as well. So that is definitely changing the game a lot. It's super interesting. Yeah, that's great.
Thank you. That was actually my next question for Lockie, was actually around AI. And looking forward, what emerging trends or advancements in the areas like AI, automation, or cloud-based products do you see in the sustainability platform era? What kind of advancements can you see happening in that area looking forward, and how can people leverage that?
Yeah, look, I think it's something that I'm really excited about. Is Tesco has recently announced their digital passports. And so on all products that they shelve in the UK, they're going to have digital passports, which, to your point around the blockchain, it's traceability, and it's a level of traceability that we haven't seen before. I think it'll go beyond supermarkets. It'll go into building, it'll go into construction, it'll go into engineering. It'll also go into the medical space. You really just have to look at all the high emissions industries. So I personally think that's really exciting, because that makes what we do look like kindergarten stuff, right? Like, which is cool, because then it's a challenge for us. We got to up our game. So I think that's really exciting use of technology here. That's probably the main one I'd say. I think. Yeah, I like that. I really like that.
You're stuck on that. Like,
Yeah, I'm like, how good is that? I'm like, how are they doing it? Like,
In the Australian Startup Funding Report, in 2023, like climate tech was the sector that all the investors were most interested in. There's no surprise that, that was 2023, it's AI. And the funding so far for this year has been to AI and climate tech. Like, they're the two top sectors that are getting the most amount of attention and the most amount of funding. So you crack AI and climate tech, this is looking really good, and you're speaking the love language of those with the money. So, but it's also like it's the love language of those that we need to solve these big problems. And so I was just thinking about what Lockie was saying, and you're really good at understanding what your customers' needs are. And so if you are interested in exploring this space, maybe talk to those potential customers, because there could be an area of that skills shortage. It's like the capability and capacity of teams to to be able to implement your tool. Like maybe that's where you differentiate. That's your niche. Like being able to upskill as well as, have the data and report on it.
Thank you. I have a question just from myself, honestly, because I am not an expert in this field. I don't know what the opposite of an expert is, but I would be that because I before this challenge, I didn't know anything about it. But since we're running the Net Zero Grand Challenge, obviously a lot of people come to myself and to Nick and to the rest of the team and ask us questions about, what solutions we want to see and things like that. And I think the number one thing that I keep hearing is people believe, and I don't know the answer, so I'm hoping you guys can help, that AI produces a significant amount of carbon emissions. And so people's question is, if I'm developing an innovative solution to reduce carbon emissions using AI, what's the balance there? Is there a balance? And how can you include AI that isn't going to negatively impact the amount of emissions that you're trying to reduce through the solution?
I think I have an answer to that. So for us, it's the same thing, right? We've got a clear goal of what we think our impact can be. We think we can have 1 million businesses using our software. We know that to date, we've helped reduce about 500,000 tonnes of CO2 emissions from our client base, which is roughly about 125,000 flights returned Sydney to London. We, from our very get-go, cash flowed out our carbon just like we've cash flowed out our raising strategies and our plans. So you can do that as a startup, and I think a lot of startups, especially in the climate tech space, are starting to do that. When are you starting to hit, net positive? When are you starting to hit serious milestones from the impact perspective, and why, and how many clients is that, or users, or whatever your metrics are? Yes, AI sucks a lot of power, and a typical ChatGPT response will be 100 to 200 times more than a Google. So yes, energy's huge, and all the big AI companies who are, of course, the Magic 7 tech companies mostly, are putting a lot of pressure on their data centers, which is good, right? Because they don't hit their net zero targets unless their data centers are playing ball. That's kind of their problem as far as I think about it. But if you can sort out your problem, the best thing would be, if you're creating an AI solution, starters, initially you're going to be pulling pretty small potatoes data. But you can still, carbon cash flow yourself.
Okay, great, thank you. Does anyone else have anything else to on that?
Yeah, it does seem like it's a problem for the bigger guys that have the data centers, and it is a big problem. And they're like, it's going to have to be in offsets. It's going to have to be in that space because they're trying to reduce as much as possible using AI to reduce it, and then they're like, offsets is going to play a huge role in that.
I mean, I kind of agree and disagree with that. I think the problem's power, right? Like the head of JLL Industrial came out yesterday and said, we're more worried about power for industrial than we are about land, right? So the answer is not offsets, in my opinion. The answer is scaled renewable
infrastructure. Actually, I won't say which tech company, but that's they have a policy of no offsets, and they're like, they're funding large scale renewable infrastructure.
Yeah.
So,
Is it Atlassian?
I won't say who. No, it's not. It's not actually. No, but
That's for the personal questions later.
Yeah. But yeah, like offsets definitely have a place. Good offsets have a place.
And renewable infrastructure.
But that sort of stuff, Meta and Google and AWS, they're smarter than just, let's buy some offsets for this.
But they also have zero cloud, they're trying to have that. And Microsoft is, the first company to come out to go carbon negative. They want to they want to eliminate all the carbon they've produced.
Yeah, which I think
is ambitious.
Is them reverse cash flowing their carbon.
Thank you, guys. I know that wasn't on the question list, so thank you for answering it. But I was just thinking about it because it happened again today where people are asking me that, and I obviously not in the space and I don't know. And so for anyone else who was wondering that, now you know. Before we throw over to Q&A from the audience, I have one last question for you. There's a lot of people in the room and who are going to watch this recording who are wanting to form teams and develop a submission for the Net Zero Grand Challenge. Now, you are obviously in the space of innovating in Net Zero and Scope 3. What advice would you give anyone who is just starting on that journey? So if you could think back to yourself before you entered this space, what do you wish you knew? And what do you think people should take away from today's event? before they develop those submissions?
They'd probably keep it simple, but it'd be start early. Start down, like, maybe educate. If you're in a startup and you've got stakeholders, educate them on what these scope 3s are, because it will become mandatory. Well, I believe in that will happen anyway. But so, start early.
What about even earlier, like people who don't even know that they want to be in this space, but they're hearing about it now and they're really interested? What bit of advice would you give them, or what could you point them towards to learn more maybe before they start on that journey? Is there any resources that you resource from?
It's funny, I think you've got to, do these things like at Spark Festival, immerse yourself in the community that knows, and there's so much that can be obtained by a conversation and that network. I found in climate tech in particular, it's incredibly collaborative because we all win when you win. Like, we are all going to do well. So it's a space where, be that vessel of open knowledge. Like, part of this big climate investor forum, and we get some volunteers to come because we want them to learn, and they were like, oh, I just did my carbon literacy online. I'm like, I haven't done my carbon literacy. What is this? Like, it wasn't even around. But there's so many online resources, but you get so much more from community, from the networks and the people around you. So I encourage you to get to Spark Festival, see what events Climate Salad's doing, see what events Energy Lab is doing. Just really lean into those communities, because that's where you will get the networks. That's where you'll get the collaborators, potential co-founders, customers, or hires.
I love that advice. Thank you. Love you.
Mine would just be like, if you're thinking about starting a business, it's just like getting married. So
Have you done that?
yeah, I have done that. I can't speak from experience there, but no, you with a lot less dating, I think. So you got to find a co-founder. Shout outs to Afonso if you're watching, sweetheart. You got to find a co-founder who you can work with, like personality wise. Obviously skill sets. It's incredibly important. I think a lot of good businesses fail because their founders can't work things out. So I think that'd be my first thing. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, first of all, can we just give a massive round of applause?
So I wanted to understand, the organisations coming to you, how much of their focus has been on offsetting from scope 1 and scope 2 versus that scope 3 part?
Majority is scope 1 and 2.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say much is scope 3 at all. It's voluntary, so they don't. Yeah, I tried to speak to some of the consulting team today about finding out scope 3, and it was actually quite hard for them to be like, oh yeah, we do heaps of scope 3. We actually don't do much at all.
Okay, so it's mainly focused on scope 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And then
So far, I was going to say, yeah.
Have you
doing
seen
that
any
too.
shift at all? Like in
Sorry?
the last couple of years, have you seen any shift towards that, or?
Well, I haven't in particularly. Well, that's just because I'm only been in the company for a year and a half, but it definitely is. It is shifting for sure.
Have you seen a growth in demand for those high integrity offsets and those co-benefits? Like with nature, we see Greencore's got koala credits.
Yeah.
So has that actually been demand driven?
Yeah, like a lot of companies, even international, coming to us for the Australian carbon credit units. They're definitely in high demand, but as I was saying before, it's quite hard to build those resources. Like you have to, don't know if anyone's looked into the Clean Energy Regulator of how you build these credits, but it's very vigorous, which is good because you want them to be creditable and high integrity as well. But it takes a long process, and usually, for example, a carbon soil project, you need to lock into it for 25 to 100 years to get those credits. So, and then takes a lot of investment, and then they start generating over time. And then that's when you get the money back.
Because it takes a while to get the methodology approved, is that right?
Yeah, it can. There are a lot of tech companies coming out to speed up that process, especially with that was probably another thing about innovation is mapping, your GIS software and all that kind of stuff, and maybe drones to do with flying around and being able to map locations. And there's a lot of historical data that people can put together and be able to make these estimates and say, this land is going to be good to sequester carbon, or it's not going to be good. So maybe avoid that, or let's go there. Yeah.
Who has the job of deciding like that social impact part of it? I love that story in terms of the gas stoves instead of using the fires. And like, how do you, yeah, so who in your team has the job of going, okay, we have to achieve these offsets, that's great, but how can we also combine this into the other SDGs? I think that's so interesting.
Well, I think we work because we partner with Save the Children.
Yeah.
They are the ones that come up with all that. We just
Yeah,
give them
right.
I believe it's just them. Yeah, we just come up with just great because we do another one in Uganda as well with water filters. So we staple the credits with them and carbon neutral themselves because it's quite a long company. They actually created their own credit, which is 2 for 1 really. It's like they call them BREECO. So we actually plant our own trees.
What do they call them?
BREECOs, bio reforestation offset credits. So it's like you buy maybe a credit online that's like a Ugandan credit for safe, like clean water, and then we staple it with a BREECO. So we actually plant trees in Australia at the same time. So it's kind of we're doing multiple things. So
2 for 1.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
And there's also great carbon projects in Australia, like the Savannah Burning Project, where you're employing Indigenous land managers where there wouldn't otherwise be, and doing traditional
Cool, but-
management of land that's been happening for thousands and thousands of years. They're high demand, like high integrity offsets.
Yeah, that's a lot of the projects we run in WA. Yeah, Indigenous ownership. Yeah.
Yes.
Lockie, love the business name.
Thank you.
A couple of nerdy data questions. Not really nerdy for me maybe, but not for you.
Yeah.
So the first one's around the example you gave about I think Best Western hotels with thousands and thousands. Garbage in, garbage out. Are you relying on humans to put data into their spreadsheets that you then mine, or are you using sales figures and stuff like that in the back of accounting data?
Yeah, we hate
People.
spreadsheets. No, we like people.
But people make mistakes, the point, you know.
No, so yeah, the ideal scenarios for us are direct integrations. So we integrate with hundreds of different softwares, from accounting softwares to building management softwares to waste recycling, energy utilities, lots of different stuff. So it would usually we'll pull directly through an integration. If the integration doesn't exist, then we'll get them to manually upload. And then part of the quality and assurance piece of the software is it does the analysis, but it also flags to us where there are outliers or things that look like inconsistencies. And then our data team and our customer success team get an alert. So does the user as well. And then we create that sort of fixing process. There's also, this is like any challenge with software is creating the experience from a UI UX perspective where it's somewhat dummy proof. Like we have had people who run their own business have had their 12-year-old, as young as 12-year-old kid do it for them. So yeah, that's our whole thing is like no subject matter expertise.
Does it go as deep as things like restaurant, food purchasing and all that
Yeah,
sort
it
of
does.
stuff?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. So, really think about anything that a business spends money on, we're looking at it. And then anything that happens in the operations, we're looking at it as well. And then, of course, where data doesn't show up, like a good example would be like staff commuting or to an event, attendee commuting. Well, there's quite good data on that actually from Ticketek and stuff like that. But staff commuting is a good example. You don't tend to have data on that. So that's when you create the engagement piece as well.
All right. And a follow-up is around getting data from, when you talk about the generative AI going in and looking at McDonald's or whoever. Some private companies don't have to put some of their stuff on the interwebs.
Yeah.
So do you have to have contractual arrangements for suppliers, or how do you get around that?
Yeah, so this is where that sort of data pyramid hierarchy approach comes. And it's also worth flagging something that I believe is a bit of an issue in our software at the moment, but it's better than the alternative. So the issue is, so the data hierarchy essentially works with input-output analysis. So we're looking at dollars spent, we're then seeing who the supplier is, where this is occurring, date that it's occurring, the account code and account types that it's linked to, any description information, and of course how much is spent, the volumes and quantities, right? From that information, our system then automatically matches them to an ABN or a business number, finds their website, understands what they do, and then puts them into a primary and a secondary category, right? That primary and secondary category is then linked to the location, and so you have food services catering, would be the primary and secondary category in Sydney, right? And this is the emissions factor that we have for that, right? That's the baseline. Now that's obviously good and bad. It's good because we've just gotten to there. It's bad because you might have McDonald's, KFC, and Sarah's salad shop that now at that point in time all have the same emissions factor, right? Now, McDonald's and KFC might be very different, let alone Sarah's salad shop might be carbon neutral, and they do everything they can, you know? So the next step up in our data pyramid is what information is our bot pulled from the internet from public reports.
And as you're
To your
saying, you're
point.
getting more and more granular.
Exactly, right? And so McDonald's have got it, cool. KFC's got it as well. Sarah's might not have it, right? So then it becomes a piece of either we engage with the supplier and say, if you've got it, upload it. If they do, great, then we get it. If they can't provide it, they stay at that input-output allocated emissions factor for their service, right? So this is where we're trying to, and we believe this is the biggest impact net data creates, is encourages and rewards sustainable businesses. Because now Sarah's Salad Shop is actually a preferred supplier because they've got the information that says that their emissions are actually less than McDonald's and KFC's. And then it goes again above into public disclosure statements that are linked to certifications that we deem as reputable, above again into activity data, and then the top of our pyramid, like the ideal scenario is LCA data. As I mentioned, life cycle assessment analysis, full cradle to grave assessments of the impacts.
So it's going to be with a degree of confidence in your data sets, and over time that's going to become head towards zero.
Exactly, and this is where it comes like to a science-based targets and a risk mapping perspective. You can see in your supply chain like who's essentially sitting where on that pyramid, and so a procurement manager or just a business owner or whoever they may be, or CEO, can look at this and go, okay, well, majority, like 60% of our suppliers are sitting in the bottom level. We need to do something about that, right? So it sort of hotspots out your risk as well as your emissions.
And there are like some platforms that have like then vetted suppliers, or that they have their emissions mapped out better. So you're doing it.
Yeah, we got that.
Some suppliers I don't know who.
Yeah, but yeah, sorry. But the issue that I have with it, and I think it's a really interesting talking point for another panel, is we've scraped so much information from public sustainability reports, but at the end of the day, we're taking them for their word, which inherently has its assurance problems, right? So that'll improve, of course, but our alternative was what? So that was the call we made.
Yes, sure.
Is it as simple as asking organisations to track their scope 1s and 2s and reduce them or get them to zero, that then other companies wouldn't have to rely on scope 3s?
No, unfortunately.
So can you talk to me about what the opportunities are there then for like what's left? If a company reduces, like the University of Newcastle, we've pretty much reduced our scope 1 and 2s. We only have the scope 3s. Most of those are relying on some suppliers up and down.
Yeah.
If those suppliers also reduce their scope 1 and 2s, why wouldn't that reduce our scope 3s accordingly?
So it would reduce your scope 3, but it would not eliminate your scope 3 because
What would be left over?
because scope 1 is just fuel, right? And scope 2 is energy, so electricity and gas. Scope 3 is everything else. So you could get rid of, let's say I grow chickens. Well, you don't really grow, do you? I raise chickens. And I supply Woolworths, right? I could change all of my vehicles on the farm to EVs. I could have huge solar panels and only charge the cars with renewables. I could run the whole farm from an energy perspective off solar, right? But then what about the transport and logistics company that gets the chickens to Woolies? Or what about the waste and recycle, the waste that I produce? I'm always going to produce some waste. That's in my scope 3. What about the soy that I buy to feed the chickens? You know, there are things that are in your scope 3 that aren't ever going to be in your scope 1 and 2, if that makes sense.
I understand that, but if those soy provider,
Yes.
But then the soy provider, same problem. Let's say they go perfect on scope 1 and 2, but now they have the packaging, like the plastics that they wrap their soy in. Right, and then you go back to them. Okay, the plastics company, they're perfect now on scope 1 and 2, but then they're getting these pellets from somewhere, and they've got consultant. It's just a never-ending
Yeah.
game.
Like you didn't say salmon farming.
Yeah.
Woo.
Yeah.
So when you say that carbon credits come into play in an area like that, then they can just go, well, there's nothing else we can do here. We can actually just offset through purchasing credits.
Yeah, for sure. Like again, I think credits are fantastic. Like I think like good credits are fantastic and play an awesome role. I think it's always really good to think of it as a bit of like a weigh scale, right? Like I think an amazing example we see quite often is we built a system that was way too hard to build, took way too much time, and no one really cares about it, which is
Perfect.
Which is great. It's exactly what you want. No, but it looks at fuel prices, and it'll see a company buys. Let's say I fill up my car to go back to Sydney, right? And I spend $100. It'll know that our system will see that I spent $100 on fuel at this day, and it'll look at what the average price of fuel was today, and it'll work out what the leader should be, right? Because we don't have open banking links, we're pulling it from the accounting software instead.
No.
So, right, so really cool piece of technology. No one really cares or notices it that much, but cool piece of technology regardless. Is it worth me, let's pretend that I was way bigger than it is, right? Is it worth me getting every single fuel receipt from everyone and reading through like the exact liters and calculating all of that up if it's going to take me 100 hours to do? Probably not, right? If this system is still pretty close to right.
Yeah.
So I think it comes back to that point, and like with the offsets, like a lot of the time your offsets are your solution to this sort of weigh scale efficiency.
Yeah, I guess that's what our carbon footprinting and emission strategy do. It's like we can show you, like, you know, your technology and show people what they can do to reduce everything, and then it's like, well, there's nothing else there. You can purchase some credits.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good point you made before, because there was this like, I don't know, having worked in the not-for-profit sustainability space a long time, there's always these arguments between what shade of green you are,
Yeah.
and there was a tax on offsets. When you think about it, it's like companies don't pay for it voluntarily unless they're actually really committed to reducing.
Rightfully so, though. I was in attack. Some of the credit projects terrible,
Yeah.
but
I agree.
really, really bad. Deserve all the attacking they get.
Yeah.
Some really good. You know,
Was that one you're involved in?
yeah.
With taxing. I mean, I didn't work in that area, but
No, like I think, which kind of comes back to my point, I believe, of why you need a subject matter expert, right? You need that advisor. You need that person who cares enough about this that they're going to check it and vet it.
Yeah, definitely.
We are running out of time, so we can jump into one more question. But as you can see, my team is really heavily involved in this because we have so many questions.
can I ask who is thinking about the challenge?
What's you?
Yes. Okay, awesome.
I love this. Yes.
Okay, quick question. I guess this is regarding more of the carbon credits. I guess I'm very new to Scope 3, even newer to the whole carbon market and credits scenario. I think my main question is, I understand that you've got these projects that run these projects to create some sort of carbon credit, if applicable.
Yep.
And then you've got organizations who will have, even say, take the university by the end of said financial year or however it's calculated, and they go, this is our cost emission over this certain time period. We either want to take initiative for creating our own project to kind of create our own offset.
Yeah.
Or if we can't do it, or any business can't, have that capability, look for these carbon credits. So I guess my question is, are these organizations or businesses pushing more than the projects are towards the organizations? Like, is there a push that's more leaning to one side than
Is it
the
like
other? So like,
we're pushing for an organisation to run their own project?
or are you, say, for instance, pushing for organizations to be like, hey, buy our credits type of thing? Or are these organizations coming to you saying, hey, we need help, or we want to buy credits? How can we help this scenario?
Yeah, I think-
to put our money.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a bit of both, actually. Yeah, I think there are a lot of companies coming to us saying, we need to meet these targets. We can buy credits.
Yeah.
But also, when I was talking about the staple and co-benefits of credits as well, I think there's there is misinformation out there, but there is obviously bad credits as well.
Yeah.
So it's like this funny
Yeah.
way thing. So Yeah, it's definitely a different space.
Okay, because I guess my thought idea, and I guess this sort of links in with the challenge, is looking at that situation and seeing where the main problems lie with organisations wanting to or not wanting to buy these carbon credits, because obviously there's a big problem, and that's what you said. If something's going to be useful, these carbon credits are going to be useful not from one project to another. So I guess trying to figure out some sort of solution that will help refine that scenario so that these organizations will want to actually pursue these carbon credits as a sustainable and reliable thing to do, rather than possibly, I'm not too sure if I want to step foot in these projects because it's like a quality assurance sort of thing.
Yeah. Cool. I think these projects as well, as I was saying, they're huge, especially the ACCU projects in Australia. There's so many different projects you can now do within Australia, but it costs a lot of money to get it up and running, and then the investment over time is like where you get the credits back. So
Okay.
Thank you. That wraps up our panel for now. Sorry.
Personal questions now. Yeah.
But yeah, all personal questions now. But can we just give another massive round of applause?